It's been a week of intense diplomacy here in Gyeongju, especially for the South Korean leader. And he is now left with his first summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping this afternoon. Will the Xi summit reshape Seoul-Beijing relations? For that, we turn to our foreign affairs correspondent, Oh Soo-young. Good morning, Soo-young.
Good morning, Tammy.
So, Soo-young, President Xi Jinping is in South Korea on a state visit for the first time in 11 years, isn't he?
Yes, that's right. And in 11 years, that will be the first time since July 2014 when he made his state visit to South Korea under the presidency of then President Park-geun-hye.
Right.
And this was a very noteworthy event for many observers because it's the first time that a Chinese leader visited South Korea ahead of North Korea. And particularly surprising as Park-geun-hye was a conservative government, which is traditionally leaning more towards the US than China. So this really sent out back then two signals. The first was that China, back then at least, was willing to deepen its economic and political relations with South Korea. And second, it wanted to express strong dissatisfaction over North Korea's ongoing ballistic missile program and, of course, its nuclear program. So this was a strong signal. But, of course, nowadays, many things have changed. Geopolitical conditions have changed, especially after China imposed a series of economic sanctions and measures against South Korean businesses over their anger because Seoul decided to install THAAD batteries, so US missile defense systems, in its own national defense against North Korean missiles and its nuclear threat. And Beijing perceived this as a direct security threat from Washington to China. So since then, relations have soured, and the ongoing US-China rivalry hasn't helped because now both sides are pressuring South Korea and many other middle powers to align with either the US and China. But for Korea, this is practically impossible because the US is our largest security partner. So moving away from it is pretty much impossible, both militarily and ideologically. And China is our neighbor, so geographically it's impossible to move away from China. So relations have been precarious between Seoul and Beijing at best.
So much has changed, both at home and abroad, especially regarding Korean Peninsula issues. Now, Soo-young, it is the first summit between Yi and Xi, but how has the actual engagement been between the two leaders so far?
Surprisingly quieter than initially thought. So because President Lee Jae-myung is known as a progressive politician, it was assumed that given his given that he's in the Democratic Party of Korea, which is traditionally more aligned with Beijing, that relations between the two countries would soon warm up, especially after the leadership of now impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. But since he came to office, President Lee Jae-myung has been trying to practice pragmatic diplomacy. And this means pursuing South Korea's own national interests, not being tied to ideology or geography or whatever, but, making a rational decision and being flexible about South Korea's own strategic interests. And in doing so, he's made it perfectly clear that he does not wish to distance himself from the United States. And at the same time, he wants to maintain stable relations with China. So in doing so, he's issued related statements, and also the first week that he took office, he made the point of calling the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, third in his list of world leaders.
Right.
So this came after President Donald Trump and then Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and Xi Jinping came third. And this was a huge contrast to his progressive predecessor, then President Moon Jae-in, who called China second after the US when he first became president. So China, according to foreign policy circles in Seoul, has been quite dissatisfied with this kind of alignment towards Washington, and also concerned, especially after President Lee Jae-myung said in Washington that the era of South Korea relying on the US for security and trade on China is now over. South Korea must work with the US on both fronts for both traditional and economic security. But that's not to say that President Lee hasn't been working on China relations. He sent National Speaker Woo Won-sik to the quite controversial Victory Day parade in China on September 3rd. And that's the second highest political figure in South Korea. And more recently, he appointed as ambassador to China, the eldest son of former President Roh Jae-yeon, who is highly regarded in Beijing because of his father's contribution to bilateral ties. In 1992, he was considered the architect of normalizing relations between South Korea and China in modern-day history. So we'll have to see today whether relations will warm up significantly, but that's been the course of events.
President Lee Jae-myung and Chinese President Xi Jinping have a lot of business to get down to this afternoon, including China's unofficial ban on Korean pop culture known as Hallyu. Now, what is the current situation on that official ban?
Right, so this unofficial ban on Korea's cultural content began in 2017 after, again, as South Korea said that it would install US missile defense batteries on the Korean Peninsula. Along with other economic measures against the Korean economy, China decided to also put an effective ban on Korea's cultural industries, from gaming to films, K-dramas, and also K-pop. And now it maintains that there was never an official ban. So there was a lot of bureaucracy officially. So now Korean cultural contents to appear on Chinese television, to stage K-pop concerts, they require approval and review from the Chinese government, but they've been routinely denied. So officially this is due to red tape or bureaucratic slowness or complications, but unofficially and more realistically it's been a ban against Hallyu or Korean contents.
Now, apart from the cultural stuff, now how were Yi and Xi expected to discuss trade and economic cooperation, especially followed by the summit between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping? I mean, they have reached the consensus, but the trade war appears to be not over yet, as far as I understand.
Right, exactly. So as we discussed before, this tit-for-tat kind of retaliation between the US and China, it will presumably continue for some time, because the battle for now over minerals and soybeans and so on and so forth, fentanyl, the battle is over, but the war definitely isn't. So South Korean firms remain highly cautious and rather anxious about their long-term investments and business with China. And well, in order to reassure Korean businesses, there needs to be a certain level of stability here, but that's been rather difficult, especially over an almost decade-long period of time after China again imposed a comprehensive series of economic retaliation measures against the Korean economy. The effects of that have been long-lasting and they haven't been fully lifted, including on cultural contents, of course. So President Yi is expected to raise this in his talks with President Xi to promote, exchanges economically and trade, and to provide some kind of, some kind of reassurance for Korean businesses. So he'll be signaling to Xi that we want something more definitive.
Well, I'm sure he will be seeking mutual benefits that will satisfy both sides. Then now North Korea will no doubt be on the agenda for the day. Do you think South Korea will once again ask China to play a constructive role in dealing with Korean Peninsula issues and North Korea's nuclear program?
Most definitely. I mean, that has definitely always been Seoul's MO when it comes to China. It always asks China to use its influence to pressure or at least convince its smaller neighbour to, move to a better path and, give up its nuclear weapons and move towards peace and prosperity in the region. And this request will come, after President Xi stood alongside, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin in September during China's Victory Day parade. And the three seem to present this very concerning sort of unity against, the rules-based international order, and especially against Western countries, and that nowadays includes South Korea, right? So after that, there have been growing concerns, especially as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Xi Jinping, when they sat down in September in their bilateral summit, in their readout, there was no mention of denuclearization.
Right.
And in all of their previous summits, they had always mentioned denuclearization. And of course, this was when North Korea was looking to negotiate with the US. But at the same time, China was clearly trying to play a role in bringing North Korea to the table. But it's now very concerning whether China is, backtracking from that, and whether it's enabling North Korea even. And well, President Xi today will definitely be asking Beijing once again to play a constructive role. And the foreign ministers meeting between the two countries in September, very shortly after Xi and Kim's meeting, our foreign minister Cho Hyun has told media that he felt reassured that China's position on denuclearization remains unchanged, and China continues to wish for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But bringing in the leaders to say that and having President Xi Jinping on board, that would definitely be much more helpful. And of course, we mentioned North Korea saying this morning that it basically doesn't care if China and South Korea talk.
Well, it sounded quite anti, though.
Right, and that's of course its usual acerbic kind of rhetoric, right? But experts this morning, who I've been messaging, have noted that this is North Korea still rather toning down what it actually could have said out of respect for Xi Jinping.
Okay.
So this indicates that it's definitely watching.
Well, we do know for sure that North Korea is closely following the upcoming Xi summit. Now, Soo-young, there's another issue between Seoul and Beijing. China has been installing illegal structures between the two borders, the sea border, since 2018. 2018, and now. That's illegal under the existing agreements. Will that be brought up this time or no?
It's certainly expected to be brought up. Our foreign minister has brought it up in his meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in September. And as you said, China since 2018 has been installing at least a dozen of these massive, some are quite large, these steel structures or platform-like structures. And China has been claiming that these are for fish farming, so it's saying they're, for aquaculture purposes. But South Korea, along with a bunch of experts, international media, are very concerned that this is China employing its usual grey zone tactics that we're seeing in the South China Sea. So it's making these unofficial kind of, territory, encroachments into the provisional maritime zone between South Korea and China that was forged in 2001, because their maritime claims, they overlap, and they decided to jointly operate the region, and China is breaking that rule. So what South Korea is doing by raising this over the past few months very sharply is trying to nip this in the bud so that this doesn't turn into a stronger jurisdictional claim by China in the coming months or years.
Well, the two leaders have a lot on their shoulders in the afternoon here in Gyeongju. Let's see how that unfolds.
Yes,
thanks for coming in tonight. This morning, Soo-young, sorry, I saw you last night, so it feels like a continuation
You're
of
working around
the coverage.
The clock, Tammy.
All right, I'll see you later.
Thanks very much.